Thank you for joining our webcast today on analyzing QuickBooks data with IDEA, bringing the power of IDEA to smaller audits. Many small and medium-sized businesses use QuickBooks, and for many it serves as the company's general ledger, providing a record of financial transactions such as accounts, payments, revenues, and expenses. Our presenter today, Carl Seyfarth, has helped numerous clients use IDEA to analyze QuickBooks data. Today he will demonstrate some of his proven techniques for us. Carl has more than 20 years of experience providing audit services for nonprofits and local governments in the New York area. His two-partner firm, Seyfarth & Seyfarth, provides better services than its larger competitors by using data analytics, such as IDEA, to improve audits. This webcast is being recorded, and we will send that out to everyone along with the slides within the next day or two. We welcome your questions. Please type them in the questions box to the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll address your questions towards the end of Carl's presentation. Thank you for joining us, and Carl, we'll turn it over to you now.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. Hello, everybody. I hope you find this helpful and useful in your audit work. I do a lot of audits of small businesses, or mostly nonprofit organizations of various sizes, and most of them use QuickBooks. And I also do some larger audits of schools that don't use QuickBooks. And to contrast that, getting the data from QuickBooks is a lot easier. And it's because I'm in complete control of the data acquisition process. I know what I'm going to get. I know how to ask for it. I don't have to make many requests and get different things from different people. I can control what fields that I'm requesting. And so I'm on the data acquisition slide, which is a few down, and I'm there. I don't do this very often, so bear with me. I'll try to keep myself up with where I am. So this is an example of the fields that I normally might request in my data acquisition file. And this is for payments. And I try to standardize all of my data acquisition so that I'm always getting the same things to fit in the same file types. I do that by, I get the accountant's copy or a portable copy. I figure out what fields I want to do for my tests, and then I standardize that. So these would be my standard disbursements fields. Normally I'm going to opt for more fields than may be necessary. Like sometimes I might never use the last modified or entered last modified field, but if I want to use it later, I'll have it there to use. And one of the best ways I've found for doing the imports is to export from QuickBooks into a CSV file. What this lets me do is to import using a standardized RDF file so that I know everything's going to come over the same way every time for every client. And if you're not familiar with how to get that, you do send report in Excel and just create a comma separated value from the export in QuickBooks. Okay. And this would be an example of what the fields look like after they've been imported using the standard RDF. And one of the things that I found useful is I know that I'm going to have to convert a number of the different fields when they come in, so I might as well build that right into the RDF. So I've taken the entered date, and this is the formula here to come up and convert this entered date into the date type virtual date field. The same for an entered time. Putting the date into a numeric format. I might want to separate out the account number from the actual account, so I can do the formulas for those and separate all those, those descriptions. That way I've got a file. It doesn't really need a lot of manipulation once it's in, and I'm pretty well good to go once I have that running. Invariably, after you import it, you need to take a look and make sure it came in the way you expected it to come in. Sometimes there's errors in the field, maybe things didn't come over quite right. Some clients use slightly different conventions in their QuickBooks. For example, I've got one that uses source name rather than name, so that, like, if you're looking for a payee, it's not going to show up under the name column when you do the export. It's going to show up under source name, so you need to adjust for that as you go. One problem I have run into too is some clients are starting to use QuickBooks Online. You can still get most of the same data, but QuickBooks Online doesn't have transaction numbers. So if you like to summarize things by transaction number, you can't do it with the QuickBooks Online because that data field just doesn't exist. But you can still go through and do much of the same selection process in QuickBooks Online that you can on the other. Okay. In order to make my process pretty well clear and also standardized, is I put together some standard scripts that I use on pretty much every client I work on with QuickBooks. So I might have some just to review payments, and those would usually they involve stratifications and some Benford analysis, gap analysis, so that if I'm looking for gaps in the check numbers, things like that, it's all built in. I don't have to run a whole bunch of tests. I can just run it once, and there it is. Reviewing receipts, invoices or bills, I do a very similar process because some clients, they enter all their payment transactions in as a check, so they don't use the accounts payable feature as much, and others use the accounts payable feature very fully. So you have to kind of know the client and adapt your ways for each one. I have some scripts for looking at payroll, reviewing adjusting entries, and also doing a search for unrecorded liabilities so that I can set my parameters and pick a dollar amount for month 1, month 2, month 3, and so on. And so it automatically does a stratified search. Okay. What I like to do with my standard scripts, because make sure I can find them, is I like to customize my ribbon under the file options idea so that I can have them handy, and I put them into a standardized audit script box. So here's an example of what my ribbon looks like with my standard scripts. And I've got some for QuickBooks, Finance Manager, some different programs. Unfortunately, about a month or so ago, they changed over our server, and things that weren't supposed to get changed got changed, and I lost my ribbon. So I'm in the process of rebuilding it. Okay. I like to get my data and analyze it before I even set foot at the client's door. And so I like to do a preliminary analytical preliminary review of the data files, just so I can get an idea of what's going on, look for unusual transactions. And one thing I like to get a look at is what kind of payments are they making? What are the sizes that they're running? And so I do the stratification, and this is pretty much for me a standard stratification, but these intervals are pretty common. It fits the size client I'm using fairly well, so I just keep that built right into my script, so I don't have to go changing it all the time. And you can kind of see, okay, yeah, they're doing a lot of different payments below $100. But it really doesn't amount to too much. It's only a little over $9,000, where all the other payments are substantially more than that. And also it kind of highlights, oh, yeah, I'm going to want to click in on the number of records on some of these and see what those larger type payments are. And by doing that, I've been able to go into clients with a list of questions about, certain payments before I got there. And a couple times they said, well, we were going to ask you about that. And it turned out to be a situation that needed board action to remedy. So by clicking into those things, you can really get a good idea of what they're paying, how they're, and the sizes of things. I also do a Benford's analysis on the payments, and it's not so much to see that they're in conformity with Benford's law, but for some strange reason, when you click on the reds and the yellows, these strange things seem to jump out. I don't know quite why, but they just seem to pop out from doing that. So I usually run it anyway. Sometimes they're in conformity, sometimes they're not, but usually with smaller data sets, you don't really expect that anyway. But it just kind of seems to pop up unusual types of transactions. I also like to summarize by vendor. Then I can see who they're paying to. I can look down that list for potential related party transactions, unusual types of vendors, and why are you paying this or that. And here I've got the vendor number rather than the name, just because I'm trying to keep the client's information private. But you can actually get in and say, oh yeah, okay, there's a couple of these vendors. I expected to see those types of large payments to these contractors or whoever they might be, and you can get a good idea what's going on. Like I said, I run the gap analysis. You have to be wary when doing that because quite frequently it brings up false positives. It'll show gaps when they really don't exist, and most of that is due to data issues. And the problem usually that I run into is that they're not numbering the checks properly, or we've excluded from the data set payroll liability checks, and they may be actually using that same check series for those payroll liability checks. Sometimes they might have multiple bank accounts and they're all included in that one set, so we have to be sure to separate those out properly. And sometimes they're manual, or they may be using EFT or ACH or debit cards and entering that as a check, and they're either putting just a V or some other number in the check number series or some other strange thing. So those are just some things to watch out for. So you really have to kind of know the data when you're running the tests, or it could lead to some inaccurate information. Okay. I have some a script that I run for payroll, and it's a useful tool for analyzing payroll. But once again, you have to be sure you know how they're getting that data in before you can do anything. There's probably two types of payroll issues. They're either going to use their own payroll using QuickBooks. They've got a bunch that use it, Paychex or ADP, and they re-enter the checks, or they might do it through a journal entry, some import. Each of those things has different types of data acquisition problems. You can get the payroll by capturing the, if you go into the journal section of QuickBooks, you can tell it to pick all the paychecks. And that's going to give you one data set. Or sometimes it might be easier to use the salary codes. So we go into that and you use multiple accounts, and then you pick all the different salary codes so that you can just get all of the gross pay charged into the into the salary accounts. If you pick it up from the journal, it comes up something like this. And that may or may not be a problem. Sometimes if you want to do it through this, it's easier to do this as a PDF, and then you can customize what you want to get. So if you just want to get the top line and pick up the net pay, you can do that, or you can get all the data. That may be overwhelming at times, depends on what you want to do. There's a lot of extra data in this particular file. I would usually just opt for the top line. Okay. And this is an example of what my summary analysis might look like for the payroll by employee. Some of the things I'm looking for in here, I know the employees. This is a fairly small client, and so I know about who should be getting paid what. You can spot, okay, you have 26 pays. Sometimes I found there's 27 or 28, and you're kind of say, well, why are there 27 or 28 pays? Usually it's because there's a bonus and maybe a health insurance buyout, things like that. If they're going through and they're all regular salaried personnel, you would expect a very, very low standard deviation, so that would mean that everything is pretty much the same every week. So like these people here are pretty much the same every week. And I usually say, okay, look at the max, look at the minimums, why are they more, why are they less, because you can click down into each of these number of records and you can see what's going on for each individual employee. What I would probably also do on this test, and it's not shown here, but if it was for my work papers, I might append another field and make it an editable character, and I might type in explanations for each thing as I went along, so that I would have documented right on that work paper what I did, or explanations of what's going on. Okay. And this is just some of what we just talked about with the different file. One of the other things that I do too with this, and it's not illustrated, is I can go in and I can look at, by getting all the data and get the class, I can see which employees are charged to multiple classes. That way I can test the allocation of those employees and say, okay, yeah, do they really belong to that class? Do they work in that? Do they work for that program? Or is there something else going on? I can ask how they're doing it, look at their timesheets and see, okay, yeah, they're actually allocating based on their timesheets and when I'm doing a payroll test. Okay. One of the other things I like to look at with my QuickBooks files is sales receipts. And IDEA makes it fairly easy to go and compare things by month and then back again against various years, so that I can get like a history of things. One thing, so to do that, I take the file and I convert the date to the actual fiscal month, and I gave you that's the formula for converting a March year end, but you would just adjust the 3 and the 9 for whatever month the year happens to be. If it's a calendar year, you don't have to do anything. So I got the whole file, separated the files into each year, summarized by month, and then I joined them together using Visual Connector with the month as the common denominator. So this is what the Visual Connector piece looks like. So I got it up, sum by month for 2015, joined it up to 2014 and 2013, and it produced a file that looks like that. So now you can look across and see all the different comparisons, and you can then graph that, so you can see, and then you can, knowing what the client's cycles are, you can say, okay, yeah, that's about what I thought it should be, or what happened this year that's so much different than the previous years. This particular client, this is, I think, August for this client because they're a March year end. I know that they have a lot of contractor bills that they do. They have finished a lot of projects and are getting a lot of things going right at the end of August from all the work that they've done for the first part of the year, so that's when those bills are going out. And so you can kind of track through each month and each year and see. The other thing you can do with the same idea is do the same things for the appropriate cost of sales or program accounts in a nonprofit, so that you could do that and you could join that back right up into here, and you could do a graph so you can see how the costs are comparing back to the sales. Another thing you might do, and I've done it before, is to do this sales thing for grant revenues to see, are they billing in a timely manner? How often are they billing? Are they billing? They're supposed to be billing these grant costs out monthly, or are they actually sending the bills, or are they late, or what's going on with that? So I can get an idea way ahead of time before I even go to the client what's going on. One of the things that initially attracted me to using IDEA was sampling, and that it would save me a lot of time and energy on how I did my sampling, and how I could, actually have the sample picked and already in a file, rather than having to pick it and then write it down or type it into Excel and stuff. So these are just some thoughts I've had on with sampling. And one of the nice things, you've got your data set. You can go and you can actually limit your areas as to where the sampling can be, and you can look at what's going to be in that data set that you're going to sample before you even go in there to look to do the test. So this particular thing was, I had a client that had cost allowability issues, and they were from they were larger project type costs. They weren't a general smattering of various overhead costs, but it was payments to contractors and housing rehab projects. So I did determine which accounts had the appropriate data that fit with those programs that I wanted to test. And so I went through and in the journal, I made sure to only pick the data that was in those accounts, exported it. It's a one-off test, so I just did a PDF of it and brought in exactly what I wanted to look at. And I then compared it back to make sure that it actually agreed to what my general ledger said, to be sure that I had the right data and that everything was included. It's important to always verify all of your data files as you bring them in, to be sure that you got the right thing. Can't say how many times I looked at it and ran a test and said, that doesn't look right, and it's because the data file had the wrong dates or some other crazy thing. So it's important to just look at that up front, make sure you got the right stuff, and then you're good to go. So then I ran a stratification on it, and I wanted to see kind of how I should focus, because I wanted to be sure I was really catching what matters. And so I looked at it. There's a whole lot of payments that are less than $500, but they're only $14,000 out of the total. But all these other payments are substantial, or much more substantial. So I knew I wanted to capture both of these 14 and some of these other ones as well. So by using a stratified random sample, you can either exclude things that really aren't going to make any difference at all. If every one of them was wrong, depending on your materiality, it doesn't matter. You can just say, I'm not going to bother with that, and concentrate on where you think the most risk is. So by having all that data in IDEA, you can take a look at that and say, okay, this is where we want to go. Okay. This is just pretty much what we just talked about. And from that, I'm able to create a work paper. This work paper is not a complete work paper, but what I do is I append fields, and these are all multi-state fields, and I usually set it, I think, at 0. That way it's going to come up with an X. That way it looks wrong right off the bat, so I know it's not. I know I've got to investigate and change that. And as I go through, I just click it and check it. If I have a question mark and I'm not sure, I leave it as I put in a question mark, so that when I'm done, it should either be check marks or X's. And you can also append once more onto there another field for comments using the editable fields. And then to get it into your actual work papers, you can either print it as a PDF file and put it right into your work papers, or what I tend to do a lot of times is I use a print screen program, Faststone Capture, and it allows me to cut just what I want, make annotations, give it a caption, so I can give it a title, and then I can either paste that right onto a Word document. Sometimes I paste it right onto my Excel lead sheets or whatever I happen to be using, and it's right there, and it's just a picture of what I did, and it's exactly out of IDEA, and it's done, so there's no redoing or retyping or anything like that. Okay. I also, like I said, work with a fair number of nonprofits, and they frequently use another program for tracking all their donations. They don't necessarily enter them into QuickBooks in detail by the person they received it, by donor, but they'll just enter in monthly totals or weekly totals, something like that. But they use donation software to track all of a person's giving. And so one of the things I like to do with those is to get those data files and try to figure out how their data files, there's usually some kind of code in them that tells what kind of donation they are, or what kind of item the receipt's for, so that you can compare it back to the general ledger. So I get the total and I can summarize it by those different codes, and then I can compare that back to the general ledger. So here's an example of what that summary might look like. This was a religious organization, and so it's got masses and donations and conferences that it sponsors, and somebody entered something wrong, and so there was one $25 error. And they also sell religious items, so I'm able to reconcile those numbers back to the general ledger to see how closely those track. And this is especially useful if the people entering the donations are completely separate from the accounting department. In this particular case, they're very separate. They're in a controlled environment with locked doors and cameras watching them as they count the donations, and then they go into the system, and accounting doesn't get information on it till way later. I used Benford's Law to look at the donations. I don't expect it to work, but as you can see, when you look at the Benfords on it, it shows pretty much exactly what you would expect. So it's kind of within our expectations. Most of the donations are going to start with 10, 215, 20, 25, 30, and 50. So those are pretty normal donation digits. If there was another digit in there, it would be strange, and it probably would look for investigation. If I had a 999 or something like that, I'd be wondering what was going on. Okay. I also use the Smart Analyzer on occasion. There's a lot of times I don't really need it for a lot of QuickBooks things, but I find it useful for looking at the inventory. I found a lot of interesting things doing the inventory using Smart Analyzer, and it really kind of made what could be a more difficult project a lot easier, because it's got preset tests in it that you can just run and do on your data file. Okay. So some of the things that you do with the inventory and the inventory would be, I can use IDEA to do sampling. So I get that, and I do the MUS sampling so that I can make sure I've got a statistically valid sample, and I can extrapolate any errors into that. I like to take IDEA and I get the QuickBooks right when I'm going to do the test counts of the inventory. The client's already gone in and done their counts, made the corrections, and then I go back in and test that. It's a smaller inventory and not terribly material to the statements, but large enough it needs some counting and testing, but not a big thing. So then I can also take that data file that I had from when I first got it and compare it back to what the final inventory is, to make sure that the only changes that were made to that inventory were the ones that I found when I did my test counts, if any. So if I found 3 test counts that were wrong, those should be the only changes in that file when I do the compare databases. One time I went and did that, and there were about 300 of them. And what ended up happening was somebody was going back in and changing received-in dates. There was a clerk who thought they were doing the right thing and they were fixing something, but they unfixed everything and really made a mess. That also showed up with negative units on hand and things like that. So these are some of the tests that I run when I'm doing the Smart Analyzer. Look for negative units. If you've got 100 pages of inventory, it's a real pain to go through and thumb through all those to look at those look for negative units. But with the Smart Analyzer, it'll bring them right out and say, these are the ones. You've got a work paper already, so you don't have to go hunting and writing down and worrying about missing. Recalculate the inventory cost. QuickBooks uses an average cost, so IDEA will come up with slightly different amounts, but usually they're going to be pretty much this, pretty close. And you can also identify large inventory amounts and say, okay, yeah, these are. I know this particular item should be large. We're always getting ready. We carry a lot of that to ship it or whatever. But you can look for unusual things using the identify the large amounts. I've been doing more and more work with adjusting entries using IDEA. particularly when there's large volumes of them. Some of my school clients have pages and pages and hundreds of pages of journal entries. My QuickBooks clients usually don't have quite so many, but you can still get the data from the journal and go through it and run some basic tests on them. And it produces a work paper with what you've done. Like I said, Branford's has a strange way of finding unusual journal entries. And almost anything unusual, it somehow pops out, whether it's part of the law or not. It just seems to work. Stratifying by amount. I like to see who's making them. Are they the right people making them? That's why I like to have that user information, the last entered modified by fields in the file, so that I can see, okay, yeah, the right people are making them. And also, I've been doing a word analysis on the journal entries, looking in and seeing the words that are actually used in the descriptions. Okay, and a little talk on doing the word analysis. I use the Word List Maker app, and what that'll do is it'll summarize all of the words in the adjusting entry description field, and it'll give you a count of the various entries of the various words, so how many times they're used. So chargeback was used 20 times, bounce was used 32. And what I do to that is I take that word list, I append a Boolean field to it, and I set it at 0, so it comes up with an X. And if I click on it, it comes up, it changes it to a 1, so I check off any of the words that I want to look at. And so I might review the whole file. A lot of times there's 100 or 200 words in the whole file. And I'm looking for various things like errors, barn, islands, correction, loan, any kind of strange type word. And I'm kind of looking for indications either could be fraud, strange transactions. If there's lots of errors or adjustments, I'm kind of wondering, why are we having all these errors or errors and adjustments? It's part of the risk assessment process. Are there other errors? Who's making the errors? So if I look back at the original transaction, I can say, okay, why are they making this adjusting entry? So why are we having this error? So that kind of helps. That's why I do the word analysis. So I append that Boolean field, and I click off the items that I want to test, and that's going to convert that to a 1. And then I use the looping search app to take all of the items that are selected as 1, and it compares them back to the list of journal entries. And so that gives me a file with all of the journal entries that contain those words. So that way I can review the individual journal entries and say, okay, oh yeah, I see, that makes sense. Okay, poor choice of words here, or whatever, or oh, they got a loan. So you can see what those journal entries are doing, and you've got documentation of which journal entries you looked at through that test. We actually found one where they did a bond refunding or had a loan, but unfortunately when they booked the loan, they put it to sales. So you kind of can tell quite a bit about what's going on even by running that test before you go in. One of the things I struggled with for a long time was how to get all this stuff into my work papers. And what I've ended up coming up with is doing a work paper in Word and using that print screen capture program so that I can put everything in the Word. Word document, and then I can type explanations and type discussions and stuff below it. And one of the things that's a constantly evolving thing, but one of the things I like to do now is for each client, I put in the name of the data file that I have. And this is not a QuickBooks one, but it gives you an idea. The data file name, how I import it into the into IDEA, and then the name of the script that I run with it. That way, you know, it comes next year comes around, or I haven't done this particular type of client in a while, I know exactly what to do. I know how I'm going to import it. I don't have to be thinking. So I'm working on ways to constantly standardize and document all those different aspects so that I can repeat it quickly. I like to use screenshots with the field statistics, which give the numeric statistics about the data, the minimum, the maximum, the standard deviation, so you can kind of tell how much spread there is between everything. I don't think oh yeah, I do have those. So you can see these are the different numeric statistics, and those go right into the work papers. And this is how they look like after they've come in from the screenshot with the little label on them. And sometimes I'll sit there and do 2015 compared to 2014 statistics, so I can kind of look and say, okay, yeah, the dates and stuff are lining up pretty much where they should be. And you can say, okay, yep, there's most of the payments were made on Friday. I know they've got a contract bookkeeper. The bookkeeper's there on Friday, so that kind of makes sense. If there were a whole bunch on Thursday, I might kind of wonder what was going on. Is somebody else getting in there to do it? Oh, I'm going a lot faster than I thought I would, so if anybody's downloaded IDEA version 10, this is a new feature, and it's the visualization, and this is a screenshot of exactly what a dashboard might look like. It's customized to match more what I would want it to do, and similar to what we just talked about a minute ago, but it shows right here, it shows like the total number of records, the total number of the total amount, the maximum, minimum. I can use this because I want to be sure that I've got the right dates in there, so I know that the beginning of the year was April 1st, so okay, the first check is April 1st, the last one's March 31st, so I've got a complete data set. I don't have any extra. I didn't cut off halfway through or anything like that. I can look at the different counts and say, okay, these are the counts of the $0 to $100 items. Once again, there's a lot of them, and then these are the counts for the larger. And once again, it can does another stratification. So I've adjusted all those to kind of fit what I want it to do. This feature down here is kind of new. I think it's called a tree view, and so it puts in boxes the larger transactions and goes from larger to smaller. It's pretty cool, and you can, in this particular example, these are bank accounts that were contained in the data set. So most of them were, as you would expect, in the regular, and then some lesser in the payroll, and then some other smaller. But you could set that to do other things as well. You could create your own new dashboard for doing further analysis and have this be a by vendor or by account or some similar other type of thing. And you can adjust all of these so you can create a whole new dashboard on your own, and you can save them so that they're reusable. So I think IDEA is a very, very powerful tool to use, even on QuickBooks, especially on QuickBooks. It helps to really get you to know what's going on before you get in. It helps you to ask questions, helps you organize the data so that it's easy to see, helps you to get it. I find it very helpful in getting it into the work papers so that it can be useful rather than rewriting, retyping. Sampling, there's a host of applications that you can use it on for sampling issues. And I think probably one of the best things to do is keep open-minded, use your imagination. A lot of stuff I picked up on was watching webinars on fraud and fraud detection, and trying to adapt them to using IDEA in my regular financial audits. It opened my eyes on a number of different ways on how to do things, and so I've really found IDEA to be a very powerful tool for that. If anybody has any questions or any suggestions, I would really like to hear from anybody on things you guys are doing or how other ideas that I might incorporate into my work as well.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Carl. Sounds like your phone's already ringing with questions, and we do have some coming in. Mostly about how to export the data from QuickBooks. So we have a couple of questions related to that, and I'll answer or ask two of them because they're sort of related. What are the steps for exporting data from QuickBooks? Our location did not know how to export this data. And then what file are you starting with from QuickBooks? Are we printing sales by customer report to Excel?
No. Nobody pays any attention to who I'm looking at. I'll try to open QuickBooks and
keep it on the down low.
There. And this is where I forget the password.
And while Carl's looking while he's opening QuickBooks, we did get a couple of questions about the slides. The slides will be available in PDF format and emailed to everyone along with the recording. That will be done in the next couple of days. Some of you might have missed that in the intro, but we will be sending out an email with a recording of this webcast and the slides. And again, if you have more questions, we have several that came in during the presentation, but if you have others that you'd like us to address, and if we have time, please put that into the questions box to the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll address as many of those as we
can. Okay. This is why I don't do everything live. Oh, come on. I go into reports, and then I go down to accountant, and then I go to journal, and that's where I get most of my data from.
I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit longer question that also has to do with data acquisition. Clients send us QuickBook files for the general ledger in Excel. When we attempt to perform completeness testing, it is difficult to line up the items in the Excel workbook so an anchor can be applied to pull all data for each account. We actually have various errors throughout the document because we have to resize the document and print the Excel QuickBooks output to a PDF in order to import it into IDEA. Is there an easy way to adjust the Excel QuickBooks export file to easily import it into IDEA without errors?
I've never done that. What I always do is I have them send me the complete portable either a portable backup or an accountant's copy. Generally, I like the portable backup, and I haven't had anybody give me any trouble with that. Here we go. Okay, so I go up to Reports, Accountant and Taxes, Journal. Then I pick the period, which is generally going to be last fiscal year. Then I wait. And then I go to Reports. Whoops, no. Customize. And this is where I select all the different things I want in it. And I go to Filters. And probably going to pick transaction type. Generally it's going to be multiple, so it might be check and bill payment, okay, and it populates them. Then I go to Excel, create new, create the comma separated values. You could do it just to an Excel worksheet if you wanted, but then I export it. And I usually stick it in a special file for that. And then I've got a bunch of screens, so they open up all over the place on me. I'm going to import it as a text file, desktop. And I want to use it as with the RDF that I made up. And I keep it in my local library. And I call it my QuickBooks Standard Import. Something's not right with this picture. I didn't do something right, so it's not going to come in quite right because usually these, well, maybe I did. But it's in, and usually I did it quick, but I didn't do something right, so I don't have these extra spaces in there. I did something wrong with the import. But that's pretty much how you do it. And then I've got the, oh, I didn't. I run this fill down spaces, and this will fill in all the blank spaces. So I select, I've got the file picked. I'm not going to do it because I messed it up. You got the idea.
I think they get the point, though. And there was a question about cleaning up the headers. When they export journal or other data to Excel, they get a lot of headings and such that they believe need to be cleaned up before importing into IDEA. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's one of the reasons I do the CSV. You don't get any of that nonsense. So it's a lot cleaner to pick it up as a CSV. You don't get any of those headers or other nonsense.
Okay, Sherry, I hope that answers your question. If not, send another question back through the system here, and we'll try and get that answer for you.
Because when you do Excel, it puts in all those extra headings and the client name and all that nonsense. But if you export it to a CSV file, you can pick it up without that.
Okay, great. We have 2 requests for you to go back through some things that you showed. One is going back through the RDF file import.
Yeah.
And then the other one was to demonstrate the accounts payable and receivables verification.
So what do we want to do on the RDF?
Looks like he was interested in how you were importing the file import.
How to create one, or
how to import it?
Because that's what we just did here, but I can do you know how to create one?
Yeah, create and use it.
Okay. I'm going to bring in that same data file. Make you go away. Desktop. Okay. If I had one, I would go find it here, like I just did, but I'm going to pretend I don't have one. So I go next. And then this is going to go through and ask a bunch of questions. So you go through the import assistant. And it says, okay, it's comma separated. You can see, yeah, this stuff is all right. I'm going to say the first visible row is field names. And you can go in and you can give it the right, like that's numeric. You can go in and set it to be what you think all these things would be. Date. This case I'm going to use a character because of the space that's going to produce errors. And my script is, so you can go right down through here and yep, this is all going to pick up how I want it to pick up. If I don't want it to pick up any columns, I can click on Do Not Import That field. And I go Next. And if I wanted to add any more fields, that would be things like if I wanted to convert to a date, so date N, for me that means date numeric. And I'm going to set it to be a virtual date. This thing popped over here. And I'm going to go date. I'm going to go that to convert to date. Then I'm going to take my character date, put it in, and then I have to put in the mask. Oops. So that's going to convert that to a date. Check it. So when I do the final import, it's this particular, that little feature is already programmed into the import file. And as you looked at some of the other ones, I had a whole bunch of them that I did to convert, to break things out and separate them that I would have ordinarily have had to do to convert my data. So there's no point in doing that manually later. I might as well do it now. And then if I only wanted to pick out certain types of limit the data. Like let's say I knew that my date fields were way high. I had different, my dates span were, I went all the way from April 1st to July of the following year, and I only wanted the 1 year. I could write an equation in there to limit the type of data that I wanted, and that would already be programmed in. I like to generate the field statistics as I go. And that's how you do the import with that. And I think I messed up. It should have asked me whether I wanted to save it or not. I always save it, you give it a name, and then you can reuse it. So I put it into the local library, into my local library, just so I can have access to it from other files. And I use that same import for every QuickBooks payments file that I use.
We have another question about when do you save it?
Should have saved it right at the end.
Okay. In a perfect world.
I think I clicked over it.
Okay. One more related question. Sometimes data contains a comment in itself. If you use a CSV delimited file, how do you fix it when importing it into IDEA?
Oh, it's got a comma in the like a comma in the name field?
I believe so.
Well, on this particular one, you can see here it's got commas, and it came in through the CSV. It didn't separate that out when I did the export in the comma delimited file. So QuickBooks knows its headers, and it always separates the headers based on the top. So just because there's a comma in the data, it shouldn't make a difference.
Okay. The other request that we needed you to run through was to demonstrate accounts payable and receivables verification. If you could run through those steps one more time.
I'm not sure what the question's asking.
I think they want you to repeat the accounts payable and receivables verification.
Do you know which slide it was on?
They didn't specify.
Because I don't remember talking about that.
Okay.
And that's why I'm not really sure.
They're not clarifying just yet, so. Oh, he says didn't talk about it, but would like to see it. Is there a way that you verify the accounts payable and receivables information or data? So you didn't cover that, but could you show that really quickly,
okay.
Or is that too lengthy?
I'm just trying to think of trying to think of some of the stuff I do with accounts receivable.
Like double payments or gap detection?
Usually in QuickBooks you already have an aging, so that's not usually a big deal there. What I do sometimes though is I look at the subsequent period and try to find the larger payments and see if I can identify them back to the accounts receivable amounts. The same with the accounts payable. If I do a search for unrecorded liabilities, I've got a script that I use to let's see. I can demonstrate that. I've got a script that I use to pick out any of the accounts payable, so I can select the field
They've also suggested maybe how to compare multiple addresses to a vendor, but whatever you can show is fine.
Like multiple payments to a vendor?
I guess vendors with multiple addresses,
Oh, yeah.
looking for duplicates.
Yeah. That's, yep, I hear what he's saying with that. And that's, trying to think of how I've done that in other things. I haven't really done it with too many QuickBooks clients yet, but you can get the, you can go in and get a report that will give all the vendor addresses, and then you can compare them back and see if there's the same address back. Usually I might summarize it by address. You might use summary for that to see if there's more than,
Okay.
or I think you could probably go in. I'd have to play with that a little bit, but that's an excellent idea.
Okay. Well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you for answering all of the questions. Version 10, which you demonstrated, is available currently. If you need assistance with using any feature or function with IDEA, please feel free to contact the help desk at helpdesk@automation.com, or you can call them at 888-641-2800 and select extension 4. Carl had his contact information on the final slide. Thank you very much, Carl, for your time today, and for
The help
showing
desk
us.
is wonderful. So I urge you to, if you're having troubles, give them a call. They're really super.
That's right. We've got a 20-minute rule. If you're struggling with anything for 20 minutes or more, please pick up the phone and call us, and we'll walk you through it. That's what we're here for. So thank you again, Carl, for your time today, and I hope everyone enjoyed the webcast. We will be sending a recording out along with a PDF of the slides in the next day or two. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.
Bye.